Good evening, Chino community. I would like to welcome you to our community forum meeting, Healing Our Land. My name is Captain Kevin Minson, and I am going to be the MC for this forum this evening. I'd like to introduce you to our panel that we have here for you today. We have DARIAN Venerable with Upward Call Church, pastor there, Chief Wes Simmons, Pastor Jody Moore from Transformation Church, and Lieutenant Rodney Lombard. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Chief Simmons that'll handle the introductions.
Thank you very much, Captain. So I appreciate you guys tuning in and joining us tonight, and I really appreciate our panel being a part of this. And I'd like to start off, Darian, if you could just kind of share a little bit about you and your relationship to the city of Chino.
So I've lived in Chino since about 2001, and I've been a pastor in the city for a number of years. Pastored at a church that met in the Chino Promenade for about 13 years. Should I start over?
Yeah, if you could start over, Darren, so we have the mic on.
So yeah, I've been in Chino for a lot of years, and we actually, my family and I, left for Colorado to plant a church, and the Lord called us to come back to Chino to plant a church, and so we did that about 4 years ago, and we've been in the preserve doing that for the last 4 years.
All right, and Pastor Venerable is also part of the mayor's prayer breakfast, which is where I met him, and we've been able to connect on a few occasions. So again, I appreciate you being here. Pastor Moore, would you kind of please share about your relation to the city of Chino?
Thank you, Chief. I have been here in the city of Chino pastoring for about 18 years. We started out as Praise Tabernacle Bible Church and recently transitioned, rebranded and renamed ourselves Transformation Church as of the end of last year. I have been living in this city probably about 10 years now. It's been a great experience, and it's just really great to partner with you and the police department, Pastor Venerable, and looking forward to the dialogue tonight.
Thank you very much. And Lieutenant Lombard, would you please share?
Yes, Chief. My name is Rodney Lombard. I am a lieutenant with the Chino Police Department. I've been here for 23 years. Prior to that, I worked for another agency for 2 years. I am currently a watch commander assigned to the patrol division. To give you a little historical perspective, Pastor Venerable and I, we've been knowing each other for somewhere in the neighborhood of about 24, 25 years. I had the distinct honor of walking his wife down the aisle when they got married. And Pastor Jody and I have been friends for about 8 years now.
Yeah, about 8 years.
And our very first Breaking Barriers United workshop was held at his church.
All right, thank you very much, Lieutenant. And I'm Chief Wes Simmons. I've been in the city of Chino for 25 years. This is the only police department I've worked at. I've grown up in the Inland Empire. I was born in Fontana and have been here my whole life other than going away for college. This is an incredible community, and I appreciate the opportunity to address our Chino community. And I want to start off by reiterating what I've already said in both on social media and publicly, and that is what happened in Minneapolis to George Floyd was murder. It was by an officer that displayed no empathy, no professionalism, and no respect for human life. I, as well as the men and women of the Chino Police Department, were disgusted by what we saw. We watched that video, and our hearts hurt too. This is our profession. We hold it very dear. And when we see something like that happen, it demands attention. And I appreciate the young people of this community especially who have called attention to this issue, because we have a societal issue. This is not a police issue. This is a societal issue. I think police have been involved in this, and those are things that we need to work on, and that's why we're here. And that's why I'm here to listen to your concerns, to hear how we can do a better job. But I also want you guys to know that I am proud of the men and women of the Chino Police Department. I do believe they are some of the most professional police officers out there, and they do an incredible job and are here selflessly serving you. But we're not perfect, and we always strive to get better.
Thank you, gentlemen. So the way that the panel is going to work, over the past several days, we've received questions via social media, via email that we've put together. And then we're going to ask the panel members some of those questions. I also encourage you, if you have additional questions, to go ahead and enter them on the text box on the Facebook Live. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with our first question. So we'll lead it off with Pastor Jody, Pastor Darian, if you guys want to answer this one. Can you talk about your experiences or your congregants' experiences, both positive and negative, with law enforcement?
I'll take it. So I'll say that for the most part, I personally have had positive interactions with the police. But I can't say the same for many of my congregants. When you pastor a multi-generational church such as myself, you realize that the gamut of experiences is multifaceted. So a great example of that, my own mother, who is 71 years old, she would be a part of a constituency in our church who would have remembered Jim Crow and would have experienced very negative experience with the police department. I'll never forget, I was probably around 8 or 9 years old during the 70s. LAPD pulled us over, and I'll never forget watching, for no reason, my mother wasn't doing anything, but they asked her to get out of the car, made my mother sit on the curb, and humiliated her in that way. I bring that up because there are many people in my congregation that has had that kind of experience before. Then you've got a younger generation, and they see things totally differently. And my church, and it's hard to gauge because of COVID, and we haven't really had a chance to meet, and so, but I've been able to gauge through social media. We're tired. There is a palpable fatigue in our church over what seems to be situations that happens over and over and over again. And so, it's a struggle. There's an erosion of trust in certain areas, and I think we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, personally, I've had some good experiences, and I've had some really, really bad experiences with police. I'll talk about the good ones first. Just maybe 6 or 8 months ago, our home was there was an attempted burglary at our home, and fortunately I was awake at the time. It was early in the morning, and I didn't really scare the person off because they weren't in their right mind, but I did call 911. They dispatched the call to Chino PD, and I'm not kidding, probably within less than 3 minutes they had the person arrested and called me to let me know that they had him. And so for me, that was one of the bright spots, right? And being in Chino, that is, and being a resident of Chino, that was a really bright spot. However, personally, I've had some, like I said, some really rough moments. I've been pulled over. I remember being pulled over. It's August, not a drop of rain in sight, and I was pulled over, handcuffed, thrown onto the curb. My car was tossed, and what I was told was that it looked like my windshield wipers didn't work. I've been literally snatched out of the house at gunpoint because I fit the description of someone in the neighborhood. I mean, the stories could. I have several that I could probably list off. And I think the most recent one that is probably closer to my heart is with my youngest son. who's sitting over there, who was pulled over not too long ago on Euclid Avenue, actually, here in Chino. He's driving northbound on Chino, or I'm sorry, on Euclid. The officer was facing southbound on Chino, and he did something I told him never to ever do. As he made eye contact with the officer, and he locked eyes. He wouldn't, for whatever reason, he was nervous or wasn't thinking, and so the police officer whipped around on Euclid, pulled him over, and told him that I think it was his license plate or something was wrong with his license plate. And obviously that was, for him, a very rough moment. He was scared. We were scared for him, and those are some of the things that we're feeling. I think not just as residents of Chino, obviously, but as I think a community, and not just a black community, but I think as a community in general, but even more so as a black community.
If I could just add to that, and we had a discussion before this, and one of the things that came up was the thing that you guys talked about was the talk. Lieutenant Lombard, would you kind of share what that is?
Yes, gladly. For those of us who are of the African American community, specifically males, we know what the talk is. A talk is, and my dad had it with me. I had it with my sons. In speaking to both Pastor DARIAN and Pastor JODY, they had the same talk with their sons. And it's universally known throughout our community that we have to have a talk specifically with our male sons about how to act whenever you come in contact with the police. So the talk would go something like this. Whenever you come in contact with the police, specifically if you're in a car, make sure that they can see your hands at all times. Make sure that you don't make any quick or sudden movements that would lead them to believe that you're reaching for anything inside that car. Make sure that when you speak to them, you're incredibly respectful. Yes, sir, no, sir. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. Make sure you don't do or say anything that would lead them to believe that you're doing something or even thinking something suspicious. And that talk is, unfortunately, it's universal throughout the African American community, specifically with males. It's something we have to do. We feel like we have to do because we're concerned about our children's safety.
And if you're driving at night, make sure that if you're pulled over, that interior light immediately comes on so that the police can see you at all times and see your
The
hands
interior of the vehicle.
and interior of your vehicle. And you hate to say this too, but part of that talk is, and try to be as docile and non-threatening as possible. As a man, it's counterintuitive for us to be docile. And so to have that conversation with your African American son, your black son, the talk came to me also. You realize that there is some dissonance between our experience and the experiences of others in our nation.
Yeah. Just to add a couple of things to that, within the talk is asking permission.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
if you're told to get your license out,
Ask.
you ask, is it okay if I grab my wallet, or is it okay if I go into the glove box? Even though you're being told what to do, or you're being asked for your information, you're asking back, is it okay if I? An additional piece is now turn on your cell phone video. Unfortunately, that's part of it. But the reason why we have the talk is because we want our kids to come home. That's the whole purpose behind having that talk, is because we're afraid that if they don't comply, if they don't do any one of these number of things that we've just mentioned, is that there's the possibility that they could be harmed. And as a father, sorry, but this is real. As a father of young sons and a young daughter, as a husband, we want our family to stay intact. And this has become a real situation for us to have to deal with and to actually present to our kids. Who wants to have that kind of conversation? Most people have the conversation that police are good. You obey the police. You do everything the police tell you to do, and we've had that conversation. But as they've gotten older and they've had their own experiences and they've seen what is happening in the world, those talks have to be altered. Those conversations have to be adjusted for the world we live in.
Chief, this is so good because it's not only just about the talk. It's also about what our women go through, the fear of our wives and our mothers. About 2 weeks ago, so I've got teenage daughters, and I've got a middle daughter who can be a little extra at times, and and so she got a little extra and argument with her sister, and she decides she's going to walk out and just walk the neighborhood at 11 o'clock at night. Well, I'm a father, and so I just say I'm going to just kind of drive alongside, and she's saying, Daddy, get away from me. I don't want to blah, 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 blah. I'm just going to drive alongside. It's about 11:30 at night. My wife texts me, and she says, when are you guys coming home? You need to come home. And I said, my daughter, Reagan's out here making so much noise. She's upset, and she's talking to her friends about this argument that she's had with her sister. I said, I'm afraid somebody's going to call the police. It's about 11:30 at night. My wife said, get home. You do not need to be out there at the heels of all this, and the police come up. And I said to her, dear, this is my city. I'm a city official. I'm on the plan. She said, I don't care if you're an official in this city. The police officer rolling up on you will not know that you are an official in this city. And almost you could hear the fear in her. She said, you are a black man out there at 11:45 at night, city official or not, you get your behind home. That is the fear that the women, our mothers and our wives, experience on a daily basis. And I've never heard her talk like that. We've never seen that before from her. But it made me realize this is real. So there's the talk amongst the black men, black boys, but then there's the fear of the mothers and the wives who send their African American sons out there.
I so appreciate your guys' openness and willingness to be vulnerable and share this, because I think part of this forum and my hope for this is for the rest of our community to understand what you guys are going through. Because I didn't have that talk with my teenage daughters. I'm not concerned about that. And the people I've talked to aren't concerned. And again, our discussion is the police are your friends, because we don't have those experiences. But for so many of our community, I want to make sure that you guys use this opportunity to put yourself in other people's shoes and understand that their experiences are real as well as yours. So I really appreciate you guys sharing that.
Thank you, gentlemen. So as we continue on, can you just make sure, I know it's a dialogue and we're talking to each other because it's very emotional, but make sure that we're facing the camera to our audience that we're talking to. So this question is for you, Lieutenant Lombard. This is something that in a law enforcement profession we've been talking about. We've received training on for a considerable amount of time, but it still remains an issue. So can you talk about racial profiling in policing?
Yes. It's unfortunate, but racial profiling does exist in policing. As sad as it is to say, it still exists. I personally have been pulled over without cause. In speaking to one of our officers who happens to be African American, we had a conversation recently, and he explained how he estimates he's been pulled over close to 100 times. It would be hard to fathom that he was committing a traffic violation 100 times. So you can only imagine what may have been behind that. One of the catchphrases in the past, I don't know that this is still the case, but it happened to several of my brothers as well as my close friends. The catchphrase used to be, "You look like a suspect that we're looking for." And that would always be the reason for the stop. You look like a suspect that we're looking for. So to say that it doesn't exist, unfortunately, that's not true. If I were to bring it back home, though, and talk about specifically the Chino Police Department, we have policies that strictly prohibit racial profiling. As a matter of fact, our policies go on to describe that even an officer who may witness racial profiling, they have a duty to intervene at that time that is taking place. And after their intervention, they have a responsibility and a duty to report that to their supervisor immediately. So we are taking those active steps, and we have been taking those active steps to address racial profiling in the city of Chino.
Thank you. And I'd just like to add to that is, I'm confident in the men and women at the Chino Police Department and the training that they've had and the work that they do in this community. But if anyone ever feels that that occurred to them, I need to know about it. I need you to report that. One of the things that we do is we record every one of our contacts. We've been doing that for over 20 years. We go back, we'll listen to that recording, we'll watch that video, we'll ensure that that officer maintain the high standards and integrity of our department. So I'm saying that to our community right now. If you feel that that has happened to you or occurs to you, let us know. Let us investigate that. And we're committed to making sure it's right.
Thank you. So, Chief, this question's for you. So the latest incident that obviously brought us here, what occurred in Minneapolis, and I know a lot of our Chino community, our Chino residents want to know is, can you explain, if we had an officer like that one in Minneapolis, what is our system to get him out of here?
I think that's a very pertinent question right now. And as I watched this video and as I talked to the men and women of the Chino Police Department, who were all equally appalled to what they saw, that was the question we all asked. How is this person still a police officer? Why are they even on the streets? And I would start off by saying, my hope is that would be addressed in our hiring process. That person would never get hired to begin with. But if they were, I'm confident that they would be ousted by their coworkers who, as Lieutenant Lombard said, have a duty to intercede. Again, we're video recording our contacts. We audit those. If we get a complaint, we review those. Every use of force that occurs in the city of Chino is thoroughly reviewed up the chain of command to our professional standards unit and up to the division captain as well, to make sure if we're seeing patterns in that, if we have an officer who continues to have allegations of excessive force, that we're dealing with, we would deal with that. In the past 5 years, we've had 3 formal complaints reference excessive force. 5 years, we've had 3 formal complaints of excessive force. 2 of those complaints were internally generated, and 2 of them were sustained. Those complaints resulted in discipline and training of those officers, and fortunately, no injury to the people involved. So I think our system works. What occurred in Minneapolis, I can't speak to that level. You know, part of this is a global conversation, but for here in the city of Chino, I assure you that we have measures in place to catch that, and I'm confident that officer would not work at the Chino Police Department.
Thank you. So Chief, you talked a little bit about the hiring, but I want to dive a little bit more into that. Can you talk about the hiring process for current and future officers for bias? And then what about training for cultural awareness, diversity, interpersonal skills, and biases?
Okay. So the hiring process to be a police officer is extensive. You don't just put in your application and start a week later. It starts with an application and a questionnaire. So part of the questionnaire, every step of the process, we're asking questions that relate to a person's bias and how they get along with others. That's what we want to know. The job of a police officer is a communicator. It's somebody who can talk to somebody. That's the most important skill of being a police officer. So it's done through a pre-screening interview, oral interview, polygraph examination. We ask them all these questions, and then we hook them up to a box that'll tell us if they're lying to us, so we know that they're telling us the truth. The background investigation includes a review of all the publicly accessible information out there on social media. If they're in hate groups or posting off-color things in social media, we're going to find out about that, and they're not going to be hired. We also talk to their friends, their neighbors, their coworkers, their exes. You find a lot of good things from exes. And if ever we find something that leads us to believe this person is biased, they don't make it through the process. And then finally, we do a psychological exam, because they could just be mentally unstable and able to pass all those other aspects. And through that psychological exam to find out if they're predisposed to those biases. In regards to the training, we've been doing cultural diversity training and de-escalation training, community engagement training for decades. It started with the Museum of Tolerance, and that was after the Rodney King incident, where every Southern California law enforcement officer went to the Museum of Tolerance. We still do that through our leadership programs. Officers get 26 hours of training in cultural diversity in the academy and 40 hours of crisis intervention training. Again, this is where they're able to learn how to de-escalate and communicate with people. And then we were one of the first agencies to provide the 8-hour training on principled and implicit bias. And we did that in conjunction with Pastor Jody Moore. And POST requires that we give that training every 5 years. But in discussions recently over this incident and talking with Pastor Jody Moore, we've decided we're going to do that every 2 years. So we're going to be doing that again this year coming up. And Jody, I know you were part of that training. Could you kind of share with us what that training was all about?
Sure, Chief. And let me preface it by saying that my ability to be a part of that training really speaks to the heart of the leadership of this department. I was one of 2 civilians that went to Sacramento for post-training. Is that good? One of 2 civilians that went to Sacramento to be trained.
Jody, I'm going to interrupt you. So we're going to give you the handheld mic. It seems like this seems to be where they can hear the best. And if we could pass that, we're having some issues of them being able to hear
Really?
us.
Okay.
So, and then I'm going to give you some wipes to be able to wipe it down.
Okay. Is it that I'm not speaking loud enough, or is it just...
I think it might just be the mic.
Okay, all right. 'Cause I know my voice booms. All right, is this better? Okay, there you go. So there's not feedback. This better? All right, this is heavy. So what I was saying, Chief, my ability to go to Sacramento, being one of only 2 civilians that went to the post-training on principled policing and implicit bias really, really speaks to the heart of the leadership of this department and of our city. I was given training in really being a train-the-trainer to come back to the police department here. This was an extensive training around all things bias, implicit bias, principled policing. My particular section, which I thought was just so amazing, was to thread the historical needle of really the relationship between police and the black community all the way back to slavery. And what people don't realize is that the police were used by slave masters to catch runaway slaves. And so we have a starting point in our nation where agencies designed to protect its citizens were used to capture citizens. But you got to think, we weren't fully citizens at the time. For this training to have been given to our police department was amazing. We talked about Emmett Till. We talked about Tulsa, the Tulsa riots. We talked about Rodney King, and we talked about Bull Connor, and the threading of that historical needle and the historical narrative, rather, went a long way to training our officers. I'm very grateful that after we spoke a couple of weeks ago, you decided that this is something that the new crop of officers need to experience. I do want to say, because I think what is happening here in our city, the training is excellent. The selection process is excellent. The policies that you have developed in your predecessor, Chief Comstock, the policies, excellent. But let's be careful. Policies will not change a racist heart. Training will not. You can't train racism out of a heart. It is a sin issue. It is a sickness that must be dealt with. And so, and listen, to your point, we're humans. The department is not perfect, and I applaud sincerely the work that's been done in this department around training. But this thing that we've been seeing in this nation recently, there's no model. There's no model for that. One of the things that, and I'm going to turn the mic over here, we talk about implicit bias. You talked about the hiring. One of the things that I would want to see more of in the psychological training or the psychological assessment, is there implicit bias, some sort of tool in the psychological assessment that could trigger or highlight bias? I think we need to look at these things as a part of our hiring processes. We need to keep these kinds of officers that we saw in Minneapolis off of our force. I know that was way more than you asked for, but
I'm going to give you guys some wipes when we hand the mic. Just some of the challenges we're having with this COVID-19 and trying to hold this forum. So this is just another one. So I want to talk about, Rod, this question's for you. So a topic was brought up, a question that we received was brought up. Would your department consider sharing the experiences of young African-American men in our community with your department? Can you talk about that?
Yes, thank you, Captain. This is actually a very timely question. We've been having a lot of conversation internally recently. And one of the things that we realized is that even internally in the police department, the shared experiences between officers that are non-African American and the African American officers are completely different. They're night and day. So much so that we actually have some officers that don't understand what African American officers have to go through because they're first African American and secondly they're police officers. So that in and of itself is challenging. And in reference to this question, as a matter of fact, we already have a department where the title is going to be a department debriefing. It's already scheduled for Wednesday of next week. And as far as us being able to share experiences of an African-American male, what better way to do it than to have some of our officers who are African-American to be able to get up and share their experiences with their peers. So this is something that we're already doing. And the whole premise behind it is to get our other officers to understand that just because the lenses that you see out of are different than your peers' the lenses that your peers see out of, it doesn't mean that those lenses are wrong. It simply means that they're different. So if we could get that message through, and that's our goal, to get that message through internally to the officers who are, and it goes both ways, to the officers who are non-African American as well as the officers who are African American, then we could reach a point of mutual understanding, and that's going to translate into better service out in the field.
Absolutely.
I've known Rod too long to wipe this off. It's all right. So, you know, we were talking earlier, and the question came up, or the topic came up of mistrust, and Jody said that as well earlier. And so the question is, because there is not the question, there is the reality that in minority in the community where there's more minorities, they're over-policed, right? And their experiences with police aren't always positive. Most of the time when they're dealing with the police, it's because they're being either arrested or whatever the case is. And so because of that, there's an inherent mistrust. And so my question is, are there opportunities outside of what is already happening within the Chino PD? Are there opportunities for the PD to go out into the community to better that relationship?
Great question, and we're always looking for new opportunities to engage with our community. I think that's one of the things that we've done well at the Chino Police Department, but something that we need to continue to build on. We just saw it this Saturday with the protests that came here to the front steps of the Chino Police Department, where we had two of our school resource officers out there with those protesters, and we're able to engage with them. We have long-standing relationships with U-Choose in our community, where we have engaged with the downtown community through basketball events, school events, and various things. But to your point, we're looking for additional opportunities. And again, in the midst of this COVID, one of the things that we would be doing this summer is our youth academy, which is where we're bringing in the youth to come here to be a part of this police department. And you'll see the youth come here, and the first day they're here, they're looking at us with suspicion. You know, they're wondering what the heck this is all about. By the end of the week, they want to come back for another week. So we need to do more of that, and I appreciate you bringing this up, and we're looking forward to more ideas as well on where we can specifically engage with the African American youth of our community. And I also want to give a shout out to our school resource officers. I think our school resource officers do an incredible job. Their role on the campus is not to arrest people. That's not what they're there for. If they've arrested people, we've broken down somewhere. It's to make relationships with people. And our hope is through those relationships, they'll get to, number one, know who the police officer is, have a relationship, see that they're real. And then it's also a recruiting ground for our Explorer Post. We have a very active Explorer Post here where we bring in young men and women who we hope will go on to become police cadets and then police officers. In fact, our very own retired Chief Comstock started out as a police explorer. So it is an incredible program, and we're trying to do our part, but always looking for additional opportunities.
Chief, can I add something to that?
Yep.
So I just want to add that, you know, we have a pretty robust outreach program here in the city of Chino. But one thing, you know, we don't get a lot of is we don't get a lot of African American applicants to the police department. We would like to have a lot more applicants, African American applicants to the police department. And I think that is the best way to break down that wall of mistrust. That is the best way to affect change. That's the best way to make a difference. That's the best way to be an influencer. You know, that mistrust has existed from the beginning, the inception of policing. That mistrust has been there. But it's genuinely time now for a difference to take place, and we need more young African American, both males and females, to join up. Be a part of the solution. It's easy to stand outside and say, you guys are wrong. It takes a lot of courage to come on the inside and say, I'm going to be a part of the change. That's what we need.
Thank you. So, Chief, one of the things that we're seeing nationwide, a campaign that's going around, is the 8can'twait.org policy. Can you discuss how this applies specifically to the Chino Police Department?
Thank you. Yes, the 8 Can't Wait is a campaign that is requesting that police officers across the country adopt these 8 policies to their policy manual. And they have if you go online, they have a checklist, and you put in your city, and it says, how do they compare? And if you plug in the city of Chino, it states that we only meet 2 of those 8 policies. And I challenged that assumption and wanted to talk about those 8. So the first one is what they call chokeholds and strangleholds. Well, the Chino Police Department has never, as far as I know, used a chokehold or a stranglehold. We have used what was called a carotid restraint. Okay, the carotid restraint was just directed by the governor to be removed from our post standards, and that has been removed as of yesterday. I removed that from our policy. So we don't use the carotid restraint. And I would like to offer that in the past 5 years, the carotid restraint has not been used at the Chino Police Department. It's not a tool that is regularly used. And so that has been removed from our policy. The second one is duty to intercede. Our policy has a duty to intercede. If an officer is doing what we saw that officer do to George Floyd, the other 3 officers have a duty to intercede. If they don't, they will be fired. And I don't care if that officer only has 3 days on the job. They know that from day one in the academy, that they have a duty to intercede. And I'm confident that our personnel, as I've engaged them on this topic, that's what they said. Why aren't the other 3 officers doing something about this? The third one is shooting at moving vehicles. So our policy discourages shooting at moving vehicles and limits it to only extreme cases. And I would challenge any policy that said you can't ever shoot at a moving vehicle, because there are opportunities for people to use a vehicle as a weapon, and we need to have an ability to stop it when they use that vehicle as a weapon. And in fact, the terrorists around the world have told people to use vehicles as weapons, and we've seen that across the world where they've driven into crowds trying to kill people with the vehicle. So we can't take that tool away from our police officers, because then it would hinder and hurt the people they're trying to protect. The fourth one is the use of force continuum. The use of force continuum is an antiquated practice that is no longer practiced. And what it said is, first you do this, then you do this, then you do this, and then you do this. And again, that doesn't work in a perfect world. If somebody is shooting at you, you can't pepper spray them. You can't try and tase them. You have to meet that force with appropriate force. So there has to be some common sense. But again, our policies conform to the state and federal laws. The fifth one is comprehensive reporting. Of course, we require comprehensive reporting. And if we find out an officer did not report something, there's going to be consequences for that. And we have checks and balances to ensure that they do. De-escalation, we absolutely train and practice de-escalation. In fact, we now have an award that we give out for what we call preservation of life, where an officer was legally justified to use deadly force, but was able to resolve the incident without deadly force, and we reward them for that. And I can tell you, our officers do not want to have to use deadly force. And most officers will go their whole career, 25, 30 years, and never, ever use deadly force. Neither of the two police officers up here on this stage who have 50 years of time on have used deadly force. But sometimes deadly force is called for, and it must be used. Use of force warnings. We do require a use of force warning anytime that force is going to be used. And then deadly force can only be used when reasonable and necessary to defend life. Absolutely. That's why we use deadly force. And so I just wanted people to understand how we meet those 8 can't wait. And I'd be certainly, we posted online kind of our policies that relate to that, but we're certainly willing to engage more on that if people want to.
Thank you, Chiefs. Jody, got a question for you. So there's a lot of people that are out there that are calling for defunding the police, and we've actually seen some of our larger municipalities that have done that. What are your thoughts about this?
This is a difficult topic. It's a rough one because I understand the pain for which this cry is coming from. You've got a society of people that are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so I get it. I'm here with you. I am a pastor. And so I'm going to always come from a biblical worldview. So give me some time here to walk through this a little bit. God has put in place 3 institutions for which he governs. Divinely created institutions: the family, the church, and government. Police being a part of government. These institutions are created and designed by God. The church and the family reflect the glory of God. The government reflects his justice. The purpose of his justice in the earth realm is to be a restraint on evil and a restraint on sin. The police department is a part of that. God designed institution. Now here's the problem. Here's the problem. It's designed to be a restraint on evil and sin. Well, first of all, racism is evil and sin, number one. But it gets kind of cloudy and muddy when the restrainers of evil become the evil that they're supposed to be restraining. And again, this is the historical narrative here. So police officers used by slave masters to catch runaway slaves. Police officers being used to enforce Jim Crow laws. Police officers being used to keep integration from taking place in the schools. When the kids tried to go into the schools to integrate, it was the police officers that was there. So when the restrainers of evil become the face of it, it creates this cloudiness. And so that's the tension that we live in. With that said, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. the people who are asking to defund the police, I don't really think that they really know what they're in for and what they're asking for. We need our police officers, but we need our police departments. And here's the thing. We can talk about the Chino Police Department and the great work that's being done here, but our citizens, they don't live in the bubble of Chino. They've got to cross over into Ontario. They've got to cross over into Pomona. They got to go to Rancho. They got to go to Fontana. They got to go to LA. They got to go to the West Side. And so if those agencies are not putting in the policies so that they can truly be an agent for good that God has designed it to be a restrainer of evil, then you're going to continue to see some of the things that we have been seeing. I do not support defunding the police. I think it is a knee-jerk reaction. I think it is a cry, but it's a cry from pain, and we need to acknowledge that. It is a cry from a place of pain, but it is not the way we fix it. The way we fix it is at the local level. We fix it by making sure that we have elected officials on city council who will make sure that our police departments doing the things that's necessary to put the policies in place to make sure that we don't have a Minneapolis. I would bet I'd bet an In-N-Out burger that what happened there would not happen in this city, not because it couldn't, but because of the local leadership and the policies that's been put in place. That officer had 18 complaints. How do you have 18 complaints and then stay on the police department? That makes no sense. 18 complaints, and you're still on the department. There's something wrong with the policy. There's something wrong with the checks and balances in the system. So no, we're not going to get rid of the police. No, don't defund the police. Make sure our leaders are doing the work that they're supposed to do, that they're elected to do, to make sure our policies are what they're supposed to be so that we won't see the things that we've been seeing.
I really appreciate you touching on that. And I want to just share to everybody who's listening right now, the Chino Police Department is your department. We only exist because you give us the consent to exist. And we take that responsibility extremely seriously. We look at every dollar and how we use that money and allocate it the best way we can to protect this community. So I get it. And there are other examples of where that has not occurred. And we were talking earlier, one of the things that makes America unique from other countries is America has 18,500 different police agencies that are all run by a local elected body. There is no great giant state police that oversees it. And that brings challenges, but it also brings protection. And one of the protections that it brings is what we saw in Nazi Germany, where the police were used as a tool of the state. That can't happen in the United States because you would never get 18,500 elected officials to sign on to something like that, okay? And so that's where the power comes, and the power comes from the people who elect our local officials, who then tell the city manager to fire their chief of police and to bring change to the agency if they don't think it's being run properly. So I think you bring up great points, and I think we're trying to do the best, and we want the input from our community as we work on this budget.
I'll say one more thing, Chief. For those who heard me a few minutes ago, and you're probably sitting there saying to yourself, that was a long time ago. You're bringing up stuff that happened a long time ago. But that's what happens when you have a historical narrative like that. There is an erosion of trust. And so the work has to be done to restore trust between the police department and the African American community. And listen, again, I can't solve what's happening across the way. what I can say with certitude and with passion and with conviction is that the work being done in this city to do that is happening, and it's ongoing. I'm not telling you something I've heard. I'm not saying something that I think. I'm not saying something that I'm dreaming about. I'm saying something that I know because of the partnership that we have had over the last several years. I know the work that's being done. I've been a part of the work that's being done. And so in this city, the foundation of trust is there and is being built. But I'm going to say it again. I don't mean to be a broken record. We do not confine ourselves to the borders of Chino. We have to go into other places. And so one of my concerns, and I'm going to put it out there, and I don't care who gets mad at me, my concern is that we brought this level of training to this police department, but when it was sort of put on the table for it to go into other police departments, am I telling the truth, Lieutenant? When we offered to bring this into other police departments, they didn't want it, this implicit bias and principled policing. They didn't want it. So that's my concern. It's not my concern is not with you, Chief. Again, there's a friendship here, and there's a relationship here, and trust happens in the crucible of relationship. My concern is that other municipalities and other departments will not have the integrity or the courage to do the level of work that's been done in this city. And so that just means, the mayor and the city council, we've got to bring all the malls here. We've got to bring all the restaurants here. We got to bring Disneyland here. We got to bring the zoos here, because maybe I'm too scared to leave this city to go somewhere else because I don't trust what's happening out in another place.
Thank you, sir. So this is probably going to be for all of you, but Chief, I'm going to ask you this question. This has come up, and we've seen this, overseeing our patrol division. I know we're getting these types of calls for service coming in. So how do we handle a bigoted neighbor who calls in a false complaint on a young African American?
So I'm embarrassed to say that occurs in our community, but it does. We get phone calls from people who call us and say, I see a suspicious person in the park. Okay, ma'am, what's suspicious about the person? Well, they just look suspicious. Well, what exactly is it? Well, I think they're smoking marijuana. Okay. What does the person look like? Well, they're black. So this does occur. Our dispatchers, I think, do a really good job of trying to solicit out that information from the call taker to find out if there first and foremost is a real crime that can be investigated by asking those questions. If they're not, we don't dispatch the call. But if we're not able to discover that before our officers go on scene, and they get out there and realize there is no crime being committed, then I expect them to, number one, treat those people with dignity and respect at all times. But I've also given them permission to go back to that person who called and make sure that they have a conversation with that person and explain to them, we're not going to be a part of somebody else's bigotry, whether it's implicit bias or explicit bias, it doesn't matter. Ma'am, that person you called on is your neighbor. They live 3 doors down. We really would appreciate it if you would get out and learn to know who your neighbors are. So it does happen. I would say it doesn't happen often, but it happens. And I've asked the men and women of the police department if they've responded on those calls, and they have. And I know Lieutenant Lombard and I were talking about this, and I wanted him to weigh in as well.
Yes, Chief. Like the Chief said, our dispatchers, they do a phenomenal job. Unfortunately, they can't catch every instance where it's a bigoted person that's calling the police, requesting some kind of assistance. We do have some layers out there, but, they're going to get through sometime. There is no safeguard that we can put in place to make sure that, you know, every time a bigoted person comes in, you know, we have a light that goes off and says, hey, bigot, 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 bigot. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. I'll give you one example. I was working one night. I was the watch commander, and I was actually standing in dispatch at the time, and we're receiving a call for service. So the caller wants the police to respond because there's a black male riding a bike in his neighborhood. So our dispatchers begin to ask him, what's suspicious about this male? Well, I don't know him. I haven't seen him in my neighborhood before. Okay, is there anything else suspicious about this male? Well, he's riding a bike. Okay, can you get, is there something more than him riding a bike and you've never seen him in your neighborhood before? And the caller went on to say, the bike must be stolen. So in hearing that, I immediately told our dispatchers, we will not respond to that call for service. We are not going out there. So again, like I said, there are some layers of protection, but unfortunately, we can't catch them all.
You know, there is a historical pattern that we have to deal with, right? And going back to Jody's point and bouncing off of what has already been said, is there's a reality to this historical pattern. And, you know, this isn't something that has just started to occur, right? These feelings and emotions that we have, and the reason why we're having this conversation isn't because this just popped up. George Floyd's murder was caught on tape, you know, and that is the reason why we're having this conversation, right? And because if it wasn't, we wouldn't be having this talk. If Ahmaud Arbery wasn't recorded being hunted down and shot to death, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So this is a historical pattern that we have to actually live through and address. Because like Jody, I believe that, you know, these are kingdom principles that we have to deal with. I believe that what we're seeing here, and even in this instance, regarding this question of, you know, what if someone calls? You know, the reality is this is not a behavior problem. These are belief problems. And because our beliefs are skewed, our behavior follows that pattern. And so if I believe that black men are dangerous, my behavior is gonna be based on that. And I think that, again, there's a historical understanding or a historical undertone to believe that black men are all dangerous. And don't believe me, put a video cam on me, watch me walk into an elevator with a white lady and see if she clutches her purse, because it happens. It happens when I walk into a place and I can see the lady who's married spin her ring so that her diamond is on the bottom of her hand because she thinks I'm going to rob her. I've been in Walmart and the same thing has happened. You know, it's just a reality. And this isn't something, again, that just has happened overnight. This is something that some people are being aware of just now, again, because we have smartphones. But this has been happening over time. And so, again, we have an opportunity, right? We have an opportunity as a community. We have an opportunity as family members. We have an opportunity as faith-based communities within this city to have this conversation and to have a real conversation around it. And not be afraid to say that white guy or that black guy or that Asian guy or that Latino guy or girl. Sorry. We cannot be afraid to have these conversations, because if we're not having the conversations, then nothing's going to change. And if we're not having the conversation around how we believe, what we believe, and changing our belief systems, then our behavior will never change. And so this person that would call is never, ever going to have an opportunity to understand that what they're doing is racist, unless we have this conversation and say, listen, because here's what I do know. is that most people, there are some people, but there are most people who don't understand that what they've done or what they've said is a racist statement or suggestion or act. Because it's what they've grown up this is what they've grown up with, and they wouldn't understand it. There are some people, though, that know exactly what they're doing and what they're saying, but most people don't, because they don't have the opportunity. And here's where we are missing it. As a community, this is a diverse place. Our church is diverse. We have black, white, Asian, Latino. We have blue collar, white collar. I mean, you walk into our church and it reflects our community. It reflects the community of Chino. But let me ask, for all of you Facebook people out there, how many times have you had someone of a different color or different ethnicity or different culture at your dinner table? How many times have you asked them questions about their background? I love the fact that we started this conversation by asking, hey, have you ever had an experience, good or bad, with the police? Because now you have an opportunity to hear and possibly understand what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. Here's the concern I have, is that some people, some of us won't even give an effort to try to understand. And if we can't come to a place to where we can actually have empathy for one another, I'll never know what it's like to be a woman. Thank God for that. I'll never know what it's like to have a baby or to nurse a baby. But I don't walk around saying, man, you get to have a baby. You get to nurse a baby. Why can't I do that? I will never know what it's like to be assaulted or spoken to in a way that is demeaning as a woman. I'll never know that, but I can have empathy for that woman. I can say, listen, I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes, but I can try to understand. I can try to listen. I can try to have that conversation. And until we can get to that place, and we're in a place, and I know we're talking about Chino, but we have a specific opportunity right now as a community. And for us we can't jump to solutions right now. I don't think we have a bigger opportunity right now to not jump to a solution. How do we fix this? What are things that we can do? And I appreciate these conversations because we have to eventually come up with a solution. But I think right now what we have to do is lament. We have to take a moment and just sit in the pain of what is going on in our country and try to understand from one another. And if we can do that for one moment, if we can just take a beat and say, this is hard. I feel sorry for these families. I feel sorry for these people. If we can take a moment to just lament, then as we start to come up with solutions, as we start to have these conversations that will develop into change, then we can do it from a place of understanding. But until we do that, until we can have understanding for one another, until we can have that empathy for one another, we're going to continue this cycle of retribution. You did this to me, so I'm going to do this to you. I'm sorry, but I don't want to continue that cycle. I don't want my kids to grow up continuing that cycle. I don't want their kids, and so on and so on. We've got to take this opportunity right now as a community of people. Black, white, yellow, brown, red, whatever. And learn from one another so that we can be better. I love Chino. We came back to Chino specifically because we love this place. It's where everything grows. I want our community to be better. I want our families to be better. And the only way we can be better is if we understand one another.
Amen.
So, gentlemen, I want to be respectful of your time, but I also want to give you an opportunity to provide some closing comments before we end the forum this evening. So, Lieutenant Lombard, can I turn it over to you for some final comments as we conclude?
Yes, thanks, Captain. As we sit here, I can say this. I can say that I'm honored I'm honored to be a police officer. I'm honored to have been called to this profession, because I truly believe that me, as well as my brothers and sisters that work here at the Chino Police Department, we have an understanding that we were called to this. This is not just a job for us. It's a calling. And I spoke to several of my teams, and I explained the complexity of that calling. Because when you're called to police service, you're called to servanthood. And to be a true servant, you have to be willing to die to self. And the complexity comes in servanthood is because you not only serve those people who like you, you also serve those people who don't like you. And I believe if we could get that understanding universally in policing, it would change the narrative that we've been talking about. And that mistrust and that distrust will slowly begin dissipating. And what will take the place of that mistrust and that distrust is understanding and collaboration. And that's truly what we need.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to have done this. I want to, first of all, say ditto and agreement to my pastor friend down there on the end. Everything that you said was well spoken. I am a lover of this city. I have many friends in this city. We're going to make it through what we're going through, not just in the city, but also in this nation. As a pastor, but not just as a pastor, but as a Christian, my Bible says that God has given me a ministry of reconciliation. We're called to be ambassadors to that purpose. So I am and will always be about reconciliation, specifically racial reconciliation. Now, with that said, you cannot have reconciliation separated from truth. And so for those who may feel uncomfortable with some of what was talked about tonight, it's okay, it's appropriate to feel uncomfortable in this time. Because the only way that we're going to have authentic reconciliation is to tell the truth about what has been taking place with this historical narrative. That's at the essence of the gospel. That's the essence of the gospel. Before I can become saved and come to Christ, I must first admit that I'm a sinner. I must first admit that I'm wrong. So the substratum of all reconciliation is truth. And so I think this dialogue, the opportunity to share, the opportunity to converse, the safety to do this with transparency and vulnerability is the segue to true and authentic reconciliation. I know, again, putting out there right up front, I'm going to come from a biblical Christian worldview. If that's not your worldview, that's okay. But you cannot be a Christian and not have as your aim reconciliation and the restoration and healing of our land, our city, and our nation. So I'm grateful for this. I think this is not just the start, but it's really the continuation of the work that has already been taking place here in this city. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to have been a part of it.
I'm surprised you gave me the mic back. No, listen, I appreciate this opportunity as well, and I appreciate our relationship and the relationship with the city. you know, for me, this is an honor to be a part of something like this, only because I know where I've come from, and I know who I was before I was up on this table. And so this is a tremendous opportunity, and I just want to say thanks for that. But also, I know that the voice I have is a voice for, I don't speak for all of the people that look like me. I understand that, but I do have a voice that speaks for some of us. And the reality is, I believe what I said, that this is a belief problem. And coming from that same Christian worldview, understanding the golden rule that we've all known, or we've come to know, is that we want to treat others the way we want to be treated. And I think that at the end of the day, the essence of who we are boils down to that. And we want to be treated well. And so what we want to reciprocate is treating other people well. So again, I love this city. I really do. I plan on planning maybe 3 or 4 other churches in Chino, just so we can have more faith-based understanding and community and sharing the love. But the reality for me is this is a place where we have opportunities, guys and ladies. We have opportunities right now to make a difference. And we need to take those opportunities. You have the opportunity in your own living room. You have the opportunity at your workplace. You have the opportunity in your circles of influence, and we have to take those.
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate this opportunity. Number one, to hear from your heart, to hear from the heart of our community. In addition to the conversations that we've had here today and that we've had before this, we've been having these conversations with the men and women who work at this department in our briefings, talking about real issues like this. I've met with members of our community who are concerned. They're raising black children in this community and want to know if they're going to be safe. And I've met with them and talked with them. I've received emails and cards where we've talked about these issues. This is not the only forum, but this is an important forum because I think it was an opportunity for other people who might not be seeing the world through your lenses to see it and to see that there are real issues out there in our society that we have to address. I truly believe the Chino Police Department is one of the most incredible police agencies out there. And that's because of the men and women who work at this agency. And if people were to meet them one-on-one, I know that they would feel that same way. It breaks my heart to hear that people are scared when a police officer pulls up, because that's not what I want. So we still have more work that we have to do, and I'm committed to doing that work. This is, as you said, this was not the start, but this is also not the end. We're going to continue to have these conversations, continue to partner with our community, and see if there's more ways we can engage. But I'm also optimistic. I know the future is bright. And the reason I know the future is bright is because of the young people who are here, the young people who are out there marching in front of our police department. That's the change. We have raised a generation of young people who are tolerant, who aren't bigoted, who don't see color amongst each other. They're the ones who are going to be sitting on this stage when we're gone. And I know that the future that we have moving forward is extremely bright because of you. Thank you for sharing your voice. Thank you for being a part of this community. And to everybody who was listening tonight, I know we had some microphone issues, but I believe we've recorded this, and hopefully we'll be able to put it out as well. So again, thank you everybody for being a part of our Chino community and being a part of healing our land.